Today on BFD, we're talking with someone who has some great ideas on prison reform, and he should know. He's a former inmate. You know, it's easy to talk about juvenile incarceration and rehabilitation in the abstract, but with me is someone who actually lived it. Xavier McElrath-Bey, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
First of all, tell us how long you were in prison and what you were charged with and convicted of. I
was incarcerated for 13 years of my life, from the age of 13 years old up until I was going on 27 years old. The offense was first-degree murder, and the sentence was a 25-year sentence.
So at 13, you were sentenced to 25 years in prison.
Actually, I was incarcerated at the age of 13 years old, and then after fighting my case for 2 years, I pled guilty, and I received 25 years for pleading guilty.
So at 15, you then went into...
With time considered served,
okay.
With time that I had already served, the 2 years going into my sentence, from the age of 15 forward, I still had 11 more years to go.
What was your upbringing like? Where did you grow up, and what was it like?
I grew up in the back of the yards community. It's the south side of Chicago. If I were to describe it, I would simply say it's a very impoverished area of Chicago. My upbringing, I like to think that it was typical in some ways. I like to think it was typical because, like every other kid, I played it. I played baseball, basketball. I played with marbles. I had my neighborhood friends. We used to ride our bikes through the park, and I think those were, the good times, when I was a child, when I was truly a child. But at the age of 11 years old, that's when things began to change.
What happened then?
Growing up in an environment which was abusive, I would have to say, it made me more susceptible to get involved in gangs. And the gang became a new family for me. From the age of 11 years old on up, I was no longer just an individual. I felt like I was a part of something that was important. I felt like I was a part of something that gave me a sense of purpose and meaning. And it gave me a sense of security and safety away from the dangers of my own home.
And your own home was characterized by an abusive stepfather, is that right?
Yes, as I said earlier, I had a very abusive stepfather. And it wasn't uncommon for him to come home and to hit my mother and hit me. It wasn't uncommon for him to come home and break windows. It wasn't uncommon for him to walk in the door and kick our dog, and no one felt safe in our home. And there were nights when we woke up in the middle of the night, my mother would tell us, let's go, and we'll leave the house, and we will hide away somewhere, either at a friend's house or at some stranger's back porch. Wherever we could go to escape the violence, that's where we would go, and that characterized a good amount of years of my life growing up. And so for me to go from a typical childhood on the streets and then going home in fear and insecurity, it was almost, it felt natural to gravitate more towards the streets.
So you're shuffled in and out of foster care, your family life is kind of in disarray, and the gang presents itself as sort of this
as a refuge.
As a refuge,
I think people tend to look at the gang and they only know what they see on the news. And that is a crime, a mugshot, a description of the offense, of what happened, the victims. And of course, these are all important things, but what they don't realize is that the gangs can be very enticing to youth. The gangs can be very enticing, and that temptation is strong, especially for a kid who grew up in an environment who feels unloved or unappreciated, unrecognized, who feels disenfranchised or even alienated from even traditional, for example, school systems where they're constantly told that they're not worthy or capable, when they're constantly put in detention or they're constantly given up on. And so the gang sort of provides this unconditional sense of support. It gives them a sense of belonging and purpose that far exceeds, and believe it or not, gangs are way more advanced than most social institutions within their reach in terms of giving them a sense of belonging. And that is something that we now, as a responsible adult, as someone who wants to help make a difference, I try to help people understand that it's not about right and wrong. It really is not about right and wrong, because unfortunately, there is no sense or concept of right and wrong. It's about what feels right. And for these kids, what feels right for them is that reward that they get from the gang. What feels good to them is let's just say it this way, we all have basic fundamental needs. We all have the need for love, belonging, a sense of safety, respect. Most of these actions that these kids are committing are based upon fundamental human needs that we all share. And that is something that we have to key in on. We have to recognize, why is this kid lashing out? Why is he acting up in school? What is it about his environment or his upbringing or his network of people in his life that is bringing him to such a level of deviance or just complete disregard for what is expected for him, either in school or out in the streets, or just simply committing crimes just for a sense of adventure.
Right.
You know?
But for you, they provided that sense of love and belonging, but they also had, this is when your sort of criminal past started. And
Yeah.
it coincided the exact same moment that this
Yeah.
family that wasn't your family took you in. That's
Yeah.
when you started committing these crimes, am I right?
Yeah, and it's funny because whenever you hear about an offense, well, as a kid especially, whenever I was arrested, I was told that I broke a law. I broke a law. And for that law, there is a consequence.
Mhm.
And for that consequence, there is an expectation that you have to fulfill, whether it's through community service, whether it's through incarceration. But you very rarely actually meet the victim. You very rarely have an opportunity to sit down like you and I and to hear what the victim experienced, to understand the full ramifications of your actions. As a kid, your whole concept of right and wrong is not the same as when you're an adult. The maturity level, the sense of awareness, the sense of connectedness with other humans is not fully established. Your ability to hypothesize in terms of future consequences is not fully developed within you as a child as it would be with an adult. So when you deal with children, you have to know how to reach out to them and try to key in on those fundamental human needs, and also to help them think and reflect upon their actions so they could be able to understand that relationship, so they could be able to understand that what they do does affect other people. And that in essence is would be I would say personally, the best way to go about reaching out to at-risk youth.
So you probably had quite a lot of time to reflect upon
Yeah.
the crime that you were sent to prison for
Yeah.
while in prison. What was that like for you, and what's your relationship like with your victim to this day?
You know, it's funny you say that because there's a great relationship. You know, I know that my actions played a big role in what happened to him, and because of that, I know that I'm indebted to him and his family. I know that, you know, that a life was lost, and I know that it was so morally wrong. And I often think about his mother, I think about his family. I think about the fact that, you know, every year, I can't even imagine what a mother goes through. You know, I think about my mom, how would she feel if I passed away? You know, and I know every year, around a certain time, you know, I'm sure his mother reflects and remembers and has those bad feelings and those bad emotions. And there's nothing I could ever do to address those feelings. I never even actually met her, you know, and I wish I had that opportunity, you know, but at the same time, like, I feel like that relationship between me and him still exists because I feel like I'm doing this for him. I feel like I'm going out and I'm stopping and trying to prevent other kids from doing the same things that I did, which led to his loss. So I guess in essence, I guess you say, like, so his life's not in vain, you know, that loss was not in vain. And, you know, I know it sounds selfish, but I often say to myself, you know, I never really said to many people, but I kind of feel like because of his sacrifice, you know, my life went down a certain path. Like I said, you know, God will take something that's bad and turn it into good.
So for you, I mean,
know?
you've turned your life around for
Yeah.
sure. But at what moment in prison did you look at yourself and realize that you could do things differently? Was it? I know you were in solitary for a year, and I
Yeah.
can't imagine what that was like. What moment were you like, I gotta do something with myself? I can't continue doing this.
You know, when you're in solitary confinement, it's different from when you're in general population. When you're in solitary confinement, I mean, you're in the cell. Imagine, like, for example, going home, stepping into your washroom, and take the bathtub out and put a small bunk right there. That's what solitary confinement is. And being in there for long periods of time, and sad to say, many individuals are served much longer time than I did, and are still perhaps in solitary confinement for much longer periods. But for me personally, during that time, it meant a lot of introspection, a lot of reflection upon my life. It meant a lot of remembering and just thinking back and playing things in my mind, and, you know, just wondering what life would be like had I done things different. You know, that's something I often do, even to this very day. Now that I'm free, I ask myself, where would my life be had I taken advantage of this opportunity? Had I stayed in school? Where would my life be had I never, you know, joined a gang? Had I never decided to be a part of something that was so, you know, I guess at that time for me, loving and embracing, but in reality, we were all just a bunch of kids that were going down a destructive path. What would my life would have been like? And for me today, being a changed person, looking back, I see it in the eyes of these kids every day, you know, I see it. And it doesn't take much to reach out to these kids, you know.
In a similar vein, what would it be like for you if you had never been given the possibility of parole?
For me,
'Cause
parole.
there are a lot of kids out
yeah.
there right now that are experiencing that.
For me, parole was always present. I mean, the possibility of parole was always there. I can only imagine what that's like, going into prison, and as a child especially.
Because you always had the possibility of hope.
Yeah, I always had the light at the end of the tunnel. I knew that one day I would be free. And that gave me a sense of motivation. It made me want to do better. So early on in my incarceration, even though I was still getting into trouble from time to time, which is typical of a kid, especially in this type of environment. I mean, I wasn't perfect in the beginning, especially. I was getting into a lot of trouble. But as time went by, as I started to mature, I started to see that light getting brighter and brighter. And for me, seeing that possibility of being free someday, of being out, I knew I didn't want to be like the other guys who kept coming back.
Right.
You know, I kept seeing guys coming back over and over. And I used to always ask them, man, what are you doing here? You know, like if I only had that one opportunity, I'm not going back. And that used to always motivate me, make me want to do better. And so I got enrolled in college. I got my GED, and then I ended up getting an Associates of Arts, and I ended up getting an Associates in General Education. Then I went and strived towards getting a bachelor's. I got my bachelor's in social science, 4.0 GPA. I never got A's ever a day in my life when I was a kid, but for the first time in my life, I actually was getting A's, and it really motivated me. And I had very good professors that came into the facility where I was incarcerated, and they were a great inspiration to all of us. They treated us like students that were out in free society. They brought resources into us. They gave us a sense that one day we could be free and we can apply these skills. And with that in mind, I just continued to strive forward. And I ended up getting my my bachelor's, and at the age of, I think I was 22 years old, no, 22, 23. And I wanted to go for a master's, but I couldn't get it out here. I mean, I couldn't get it in there, unfortunately. So it wasn't until I got out of prison that I was able to get a master's.
Right.
And so I went back and re-enrolled with Roosevelt University, and I ended up getting my master's of human services and counseling.
Now, for people out there, though, are you the exception, or do you think that more kids that were in similar situations as you were could benefit from the kind of things that you did? Or are you just like 1% of the kids out there?
I mean, unfortunately, the recidivism rate is high. Now, I can tell you this much now. In my own studies, when I was an undergrad, while I was in Galesburg Correctional Center, I did a study, and in this study, we looked at recidivism and the effects of a post-secondary education upon recidivism. What I did was I got access to certain information through the law library. I also got a hold of information from my professor who gave me statistics on most recent findings in terms of recidivism in post-secondary education. And they came to find, and also through the input that I got from my professor, that only 2% of those who graduated with a bachelor's degree returned to prison within the first 3 years, and which is contrary to the general population, which was close to 50 to 60%.
Wow.
At that particular time.
So those that educate themselves end up not coming back.
Have a less likely to return to prison versus those who do not take advantage of those opportunities, or those who don't have those opportunities.
I see. So tell us now about the study that you're involved in. You're working for Northwestern, am I right?
Yes.
And a project specifically.
Yes, I work for Northwestern University. It is a large-scale longitudinal study. It's government funded. We look at the mental health needs as well as outcomes of individuals who are formerly incarcerated.
Why is that so important, do you think?
Because, I mean, I feel like it really just gives me insight. Like, seriously, my work gives me such insight into my own life. It's one thing to read about and experience it within your own self, but it's another thing to go out into the homes each and every day, well, 5 days a week for the past 4 years. Just meeting up with individuals who have been through similar experiences that I have, and yet and still I see a lot of commonality. I see a lot of things that I can say, wow, this guy's like my life, you know, and it just gives me a lot of insight. And I just, you know, the job in and of itself, first of all, to have the opportunity to work for Northwestern University, to me is a blessing, period. I could only have dreamed, even when I was believing and striving towards it, I never thought that it would be possible, but it happened, and I love the work that I do because it's meant to help direct the future interventions for youth, and that is something that means a lot to me.
And what can people do to help change things and take action?
I would say honestly, like I said earlier, most of these kids are acting out based upon some fundamental human need, something that if we were as adults willing to sit down and hear them out and listen to their concerns and give them an opportunity to speak, give a safe space and opportunity for them to feel equal with you, to establish that rapport and relationship. Every kid wants that. Every kid needs that. Everyone wants to feel like they're important or that they're being listened to. I think once you have that relationship, I mean, it's not hard to reach out and be a part of that kid's life and to be a positive force in his life. Just as well as that gang member in the street is a force in his life, well, you have to come at it with just the same amount of dedication, just the same amount of devotion as that gang leader. You have to want to embrace that kid and give him structure and give him a simple after-school program, something that's rewarding, that can counter the lure of the streets. And I think that in and of itself will give him, will at least keep him safe until he's mature enough to make his own decisions.
Speaking of kids, you have your own.
Yes, I have my daughter,
And
Sophia.
Sophia. And earlier you were talking about the idea of empathy and teaching her the sort of fundamental understanding of consequences to different things. I mean, how is having a child sort of affected your life, and did you ever think that was going to be a possibility?
Well, first of all, I waited a long time before I had my first child. So, and
weren't too many opportunities for that in prison, were there?
I had a lot of. Just for me, having a child is for some reason, understand. I used to box, and I guess I have this perspective on myself that I'm, not that I'm big and tough and bad, but I don't really show a lot of I guess having a child brings out a softer side of me, and don't get me wrong, that softness is there, and but I guess when you grow up in an environment like a juvenile center into prison, you tend to hide away your feelings. But for some reason, having her has just, I don't care. I'll be on the floor, I'll pick her up and we'll run around, I put her on my shoulder and we'll just jump around and I let her jump on the bed and like those little small things. And I remember when I was a kid, I used to appreciate and love those things. So I want her to have those memories. I don't want her childhood to be scarred in no way possible. They said in the beginning that when I was asking around, how do you deal with a child? How do you carry a child? Should you carry a child? They said, oh, don't spoil her. You don't want to get her attached on because then she'll be crying all night. And no, I felt in my heart that I don't care what it took, how many hours I had to stay up, how long it took for me to have to, cuddle her and hold her. If she was crying, I was not going to let her cry. That was my rule. I don't care what it was. If it was for something as small as, she woke up, I refused to let her cry. I would get her up, I would hold her, I would embrace her because I know how important, in my studies, I understand that, physical touch, intimacy, love, belonging, all these things begin. It doesn't just start in early adolescence up into a young adulthood. No, it starts from the very beginning. And I look back and I think possibly there were some things that went wrong there with me, but I'm not going to let my child go through that. I'm not going to leave her out there to fend for herself, to have to sit there and navigate her own emotions, not knowing why she feels the way. No, I'm going to be there every step of the way. I'm going to embrace her. I'm going to do everything that I felt should have been done with me 10 times over. Because I want her to have a better life. And it just gives me a whole different sense of purpose. You get to a certain point in life when you feel like, I've done it all, I've seen it all. Well, I did a lot in the past 10 years since I've been out. Having a new child, I have a whole new beginning all over again.
What was it like? Just take me really quickly through what that day was like when you were granted parole and you were able to walk out a free man.
Honestly, I had mixed emotions. I had mixed emotions because when I was coming out, understand, I was in there with guys that I grew up with, and these are guys that were in there for the span of my incarceration, perhaps even a little more. And some of whom came in, I met at midpoint in my time of incarceration.
But they became like a family to you.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, there was a sense of camaraderie, a sense of brotherhood. And I'm not talking about like a gang camaraderie. It's funny, a lot of the guys who I thought were my enemies, rival gang members, they're some of my best friends in prison. The irony of that situation, it just only reinforced my desire to want to change because a lot of things that I grew up believing were completely false.
Do those gang members come and visit you, the ones that you were associated with? Do they come and take care of you when you're in jail, or
Well,
pay for your mom's rent while you were in
No,
there?
and you made a good point, because I remember mentioning that at a different time, and I don't mean to say that in the way in which it's to speak down upon individuals or to say that these people are bad, because I understand why they exist, and that is a whole different conversation.
Sure.
I understand why gangs exist. Gangs have existed for centuries.
Sure.
There's nothing new and there's nothing modern per se. But I would honestly say that when I was in there were individuals that I really cared for, and they had a lot more time to serve than I did. And there were some of whom who had life sentences without the possibility of parole, unfortunately.
And you're leaving them behind when you walk out.
And
a
I
free
knew that
man.
I was leaving. So of course I had that exhilaration, that happiness, that anticipation, but at the same time fear, because I didn't know how to drive. I didn't have a driver's license. I didn't even know how to use a cell phone when I came out. When I went to the bus station, I had to ask someone to show me how to get a bus pass. I had not taken public transportation since the days when they were punching holes in a piece of paper. So for 13 years, a lot has changed.
Sure.
And so for me coming out, I had mixed emotions. And so it was like baby steps from the very beginning. Even with my education, it wasn't easy, don't get me wrong. It was hard for me to find work. When you have a felony conviction, it's hard to find work. Mm-hmm. Those consequences do not end.
Right.
To this very day, I still experience the consequences of my past actions, and I live with them. And I know that I have to live with them.
Then why should people welcome ex-cons back into society? I mean, just to play the devil's advocate.
Okay.
Like, why is it that they should be given another opportunity? I mean, you're obviously
Yeah.
a shining example, but for other people, I mean, you were talking about this briefly in the other interview of like how they strive to work harder than ones that you know. So why, if you could talk on that a little bit, why is it that you think that these people deserve another chance?
I have friends, and it's funny, it sounds so strange, but the majority of my friends have lived the life that I lived. Some of whom also, and it's like almost like a criteria, you have to have served at least 10 years or more to be my friend for some reason. I don't know why, it just happens that way. But I can relate to them, and I see their daily struggles, and I see that positivity inside them to want to do good. They want to find work, they want to get out there, and they want to be able to go home with a paycheck and say, look what I earned. They want that, and that's something that people don't, they you cannot fathom the struggles that they go through. I had one friend in particular, he got a job through a city program which provided safe passage of youth from home to school. He did it for 2 months, but he was laid off because of his criminal background. All the while, he was always the one that was there first. He was always the one that was there early and on point, and he was always the one, whenever something was happening in the community, to intervene and to mediate that conflict. I know guys who have been through the system, who have all the reason in the world to point the finger and say, it's this reason or that reason, and shift the blame away from themselves, but instead they take responsibility and they want to give back. That in of itself is reason enough to give opportunities, because they're in the perfect position to help make a difference, because they know what it's like. And these kids, more often than not, they're only going to listen to those who understand what they're going through.
Like yourself.
Like myself.
All right.
And not only that, but honestly, I do believe in my heart that these guys who have been through that, those of whom who want to make a change, believe me, they work 10 times harder than the average person. They go above and beyond. And that in of itself, I mean, if they say you're an ex-con, honestly, I mean, there's a very negative connotation to it. People tend to say, oh, that doesn't sound good. To me, in so many ways, for some individuals, ex-con means lack of opportunity, lack of privilege, the concept of least eligibility because of their past actions. But for me, when I hear ex-con, I think of a reason to move forward, because listen to the word ex meaning former, no longer a convict. It's someone who has overcome something. And it's obviously something that a person, who, regardless of experience, and which led him to that place in his life of being an ex-con, should embrace it and move forward with a positive notion that he is an overcomer and that he can, and he really is capable of making a difference and changing his life and being a positive example in other people's lives.
You're certainly an example of that. So thank you, Xavier, for taking time for us today.
I'm sorry I looked towards the camera. Right?
It's all right. That's all right. That's all right. For more information on Xavier's work, click the link in the description below. And remember, you can sign the petition to put an end to mandatory minimum sentencing. For BFD, I'm David Park.